You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 2nd of January 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Cermak. Coming up on today's programme, Switzerland begins the difficult process of identifying victims from a devastating fire on New Year's Eve. We'll get the latest from our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. After that, we'll hear from Monocle's Gulf correspondent, Inzamam Rashid, about a growing conflict in Yemen.
A closed airport in Yemen is revealing deeper tensions between two Gulf heavyweights. I'll unpack why Saudi Arabia and the UAE are now at odds, and what it means for Yemen and the wider region.
We'll also check which airlines and airports were the best at delivering you to your destination on time in 2025. And finally,
I wanted to offer our listeners some alternative Christmas films that maybe you haven't yet watched, but you've still got some time, and these are all classic movies that I'd strongly recommend.
Holiday recommendations for after the holidays. Let's call them winter film recommendations. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Cermak. And a very warm welcome to all of our listeners on this first Friday of the New Year edition of The Briefing. We will start today's show with the still developing story from Switzerland, which is in mourning after a New Year's Eve fire at the bar Le Constellation in the alpine resort of Crans-Montana, which killed at least 40 people, injured 115, many of them critically, with others potentially still missing. Italy's foreign minister is in the region today. Identification of the victims is underway and investigations into the cause continue this morning as well, with videos and speculation spreading online. Well, I'm joined now from Zurich by Monocle's editorial director and chairman, Tyler Brûlé. Good afternoon, Tyler, to Zurich.
Good afternoon, Chris. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well, Tyler. I wish we were talking under better circumstances because this is such a sad story out of Switzerland. You are back in Zurich at the moment, but you've been in St. Moritz. Maybe instead of starting with the latest sort of updates, I'm just curious for your reflections, what it was even like kind of heading out of the mountains and back into Zurich.
Well, I guess part of it is the real sort of feeling in the country. And of course, you have to measure this, I think, partly by mood in which you can feel on the street, but also what is being said and also not said in the Swiss media as well. I think we're really in a period right now which is a little bit disbelief and probably quite a measured tone, I would say. Oftentimes the Swiss press, like media everywhere, can be very quick off the start to point fingers to, of course, there is a search for answers, but oftentimes that search is sometimes rather accusatory. That is not the case right now. I think that there is this real sense of shock where yesterday you had the president of the Swiss Federation, Guy Parmelin, first day in the job as well, because as you know, there was a rotating presidency in this country amongst the Federal Council. So this was his first day on the job yesterday, and of course had to go down to Crans-Montana to be part of the second press conference that they held yesterday, to of course tour the scene, and the press here in the country is talking about one of the worst disasters in this country's history, and this is, aside from the fact that it was the first day of the new year, who would have thought at a time of course of celebration and the start of 2026 that a fire which of course went incredibly fast would also turn out to be what is really becoming a bit of a crisis moment for this country as well. I mean, just in the last couple of hours, we've now seen Poland saying they're going to take up to 14 burns victims right now. The French saying that they have up to 20 beds on standby. So there are two things at play here, Chris. One, of course, is the sense of disbelief that this even happened. How could this happen in Switzerland, a country which is famous for its building codes, for its safety, for its risk aversion, all of these things. But I think there's something else, another dynamic, which is that this country can't even cope with this. You're talking about a nation of 9 million people, some of the best medical facilities in the world, but that this country is, and you this is the bit you sense a little bit in the press and the lines of inquiry that we're not ready for something like this. A country again which is renowned for its civil defense system, the extraordinary apparatus that is well known in terms of its bomb shelters, its preparedness. And yet, here is Poland. Here you have Mr. Tusk saying that they're ready to take 14 people, and people will be transferred out of the country.
It does also highlight, Tyler, what you're saying there, not only, as you say, this sense of kind of international groups needing to help, countries needing to help their own nationalities. But the fact that there were so many nationalities at this highlights how important tourism is for Switzerland, how international a resort like this is. What is your sense of that as well? Kind of all the international eyes are on Switzerland right now. Italy's foreign minister is there as we speak.
Correct. And I think that in and of itself is a little bit surprising. You would think, of course, if this was potentially a terror incident, if it was, and of course this is catastrophic, but to have the neighboring foreign minister also appear is something quite remarkable. Again, and this is not to diminish what is happening, but of course there are accidents like this. And normally the dimension would be somewhat domestic, right? But as you've said, this is a world-renowned resort, and of course there are people from many nations. Israel has also, they're probably the first off the mark to send part of their rescue team as well. Of course, very adept at, of course, identification. And being able to conduct DNA tests at speed. They were already airborne as of late yesterday morning, because also they do believe that there was also Israeli victims, of course, amongst the dead and injured.
And Tyler, just finally, I guess, again, kind of looking at the mood in Switzerland at the moment, this is one of the stranger things maybe about this is still a resort of hospitality. The people are still there. There is still a skiing season, an alpine season that is going to be ongoing in Switzerland. I just wonder what you feel that is going to be like. Obviously, this is a moment where first there is this mourning instead of dealing with this tragedy. But what is the mood for alpine resorts in general in Switzerland as they look ahead to the most important part of their season?
Well, I think probably one of the main things that will happen, I would imagine if you were a hospitality operator, Chris, and you have a bar or a club and you are a place which, of course, is also hosting heady evenings as well, I think you would be looking at your certainly, whether you're abiding by building codes, have you let some things slip? I mean, there's definitely going to be some level of crackdown, and I think a lot of it is also going to be self-imposed as well. But I would imagine at a let's say a Gemeinde, the thing you have to remember about Switzerland as well is that, of course, it's a federalist country. You have communities, local communities have extraordinary power. Oftentimes people think the power is all in the hands of the canton, or like in many countries that it's at a federal level. Not the case. This is really community by community. This extends even to citizenship. Your local community decides whether or not you should get a passport in this country. And so that also means that there are myriad building codes and ordinances that are in place as well. So I would say, that of course life already is going on. As you know, this is a country which is, there's French Switzerland and there's German Switzerland and there's Italian Switzerland and also Roman Switzerland as well. And these are all very, very different regions, and there, listen, even yesterday in St. Moritz, of course, it wasn't like people had downed skis. I think one of the interesting things was, though, and I think there is this sense of solidarity, Chris. I think this is one of the interesting things where you saw this call at a national level for people to behave themselves on slopes, on highways, wherever they are, not to burden the medical system. And I think that is probably the one thing, if you stand back from this right now, I think where the Swiss are really in disbelief, because yes, we know that we're talking about, probably up close to 50 people, it seems now, who were killed in this. But they're talking, this is something really in the last few minutes that came out of one press statement, which is of the 115 or so people who are, in hospital, 80 of those people are in seriously critical condition, and there is a sense and a bit of a warning that a lot of these people are not going to make it either, and this is why they either have to be transferred at speed to other countries to, of course, seek whether just superior or just medical care that Switzerland can't cope with right now.
It is such a sad story, but thank you very much, Tyler, for unpacking some of that for us from Zurich. That was Monocle's editorial director and chairman, Tyler Brûlé from Zurich. This is The Briefing. Now, Yemen has been racked by a long-simmering civil war for more than a decade, but over the past few weeks, the conflict is threatening to spread across the Gulf region as tensions between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, who are backing rival factions in Yemen, have reached boiling point. Saudi Arabia demanded the UAE forces leave the country, which the UAE agreed to do on Tuesday, but groups backed by the UAE have in turn escalated their own campaign, with forces in southern Yemen threatening even to declare independence. Well, we're joined now from Dubai by Inzamam Rashid, Monocle's Gulf correspondent. Inzamam, great to have you on this. This is a very complex story that we did discuss in December as well. Just bring us up to speed on what has happened in the last few days, I guess, in particular, that have really escalated this.
Yeah, you're right, Chris. Good afternoon from Dubai. It is a very complex story, and one which has huge ramifications across the Gulf. So the most recent flashpoint is Aden International Airport in Yemen, where flights have been completely suspended. The closure followed a dispute over aviation procedures between Aden and the UAE. Now, authorities aligned with the UAE-backed STC, that's the Southern Transitional Council, say that Saudi Arabia demanded that all flights bound for the Emirates first must undergo inspection and clearance over in Saudi Arabia in Jeddah, a requirement that they have rejected as an air blockade. Now, as a result, flights were halted, leaving passengers stranded, including those who needed urgent medical treatment. Now, today, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to Yemen added fuel to the fire, essentially saying that Adaris al-Zubaydi, the leader of the STC, refused landing permissions for a Saudi delegation plane heading to Aden. Riyadh has said that this delegation was part of the efforts to discuss the crisis, but that they were denied access to land there, and that the STC issued directives to close all air traffic at the airport. So what began, Chris, as a pretty technical aviation disagreement has now become a very public diplomatic rupture.
And why this brings in, of course, the United Arab Emirates is because they back the Southern Transitional Council that you're talking about there. Tell us about, I guess, the STC, because they are at the key to this, and they're kind of the local key to why this has exploded between the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I think if we just zoom out a little bit and look at this whole issue, which is very hard to unpack in a short space of time, but we'll try to. Saudi Arabia and the UAE entered Yemen together in 2015 to counter the Iran-aligned Houthi movement, which controls much of the north. Now, for many years, they were seen as joint leaders of this anti-Houthi coalition. But over time, their strategic priorities have diverged. So Riyadh has increasingly focused on state stability. They want border security. They're trying to persevere Yemen's internationally recognized government. The UAE, meanwhile, has turned its support towards local actors in the south, principally the Southern Transitional Council. They're a separatist group who are seeking increased autonomy or even independence for southern Yemen. Now, that divergence has reached a breaking point, particularly in the recent weeks, where the STC, backed politically and until recently militarily by the UAE, has seized control of key southern provinces, including Hadramaut and Al-Mahra. And Saudi Arabia viewed these advances as a direct threat, particularly because parts of the south sit close to its own border. Riyadh responded with airstrikes and put pressure on STC's positions. And soon after, Abu Dhabi announced that it would actually withdraw its remaining forces from Yemen. That was seen as a remarkable shift after years of deep involvement. And then against this backdrop, Chris, the diplomatic efforts have repeatedly faltered. Earlier in December last year, a joint Saudi Emirati delegation was in Aden to try and ease these tensions. But by late in the month, the STC had asserted control over much of southern Yemen. That prompted Saudi calls for separatist forces to withdraw, a call which the STC completely rejects. I think, in other words, the rift today is not about these airline routes alone, which we've seen over the last 24 hours. It is unfolding amid pretty real political and territorial competition between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi.
Just quickly, Inzi, and I know this is all very complicated, but if you could, is there a risk of a broader rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia that kind of goes beyond Yemen here?
Absolutely, there really is. And I think there are increased conversations happening between the two nations. I think other Gulf nations are calling for de-escalation, but are also not wanting to get involved in this rift. They're really keeping a step back from this. I think whilst the news of flights being halted at Aden might first initially sound like just a bit of a bureaucratic dispute, it is, I think, in fact, a symbol of probably much larger diplomatic and strategic rupture between these two countries. Saudi and UAE policies in Yemen, once aligned against a common foe, the Houthis, are now pulling in different directions. And Yemenis, tragically, Chris, are pretty much caught in the middle of all of this. The interesting thing to see is over the next few days whether there will be wider disruption between Abu Dhabi and Riyadh. Currently, it's stuck to dialogue, but whether anything escalates is something we'll have to wait and see, Chris.
And we'll be sure to talk to you again as this develops. Inzamam Rashid, Monocle's Gulf correspondent in Dubai, thank you very much for joining us today. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio, and now here's Monica Lillis with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. President Donald Trump says the US will intervene if Iran violently suppresses peaceful protests. He made the warning as protests over economic hardship turned violent across the country. Several people have died in clashes between demonstrators and security forces. Venezuela's president says he's willing to negotiate with the US on fighting drug trafficking. Nicolas Maduro's comments follow a months-long sanctions and military pressure campaign led by Washington. He remained silent on a reported CIA-led strike on his country last week. And Canada's transport regulator has ordered Air India to investigate after police pulled a pilot from a flight in Vancouver for being under the influence of alcohol. 2 breathalyzer tests showed the pilot was not fit to fly just before takeoff. Canadian rules bans pilots from flying within 12 hours of drinking alcohol. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Monica. Now, speaking of airlines, here's hoping that all of you listeners made it to your holiday destinations and back without too many delays in your flights. If you did have something of a horrendous journey and have made it your New Year's resolution to only use airlines that are broadly on time, well, then this segment is for you. Because for 17 years now, Cirium has been releasing its annual on-time performance review, and joining us to tell us more about the results is Jeremy Bowen, CEO of the aviation data analyst group Cirium. Jeremy, great to have you on the show. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
And Happy New Year as well. Tell us first of all, because, we all like to complain about the things that go wrong, but it is such a complex operation for airlines and airports. How hard do they try to make things run smoothly?
Chris, it's an incredibly complex operation. Even at the best of times, when you're dealing with weather, strikes, staff shortages, all these different things that are thrown at you, it's hard to run an on-time operation. And 2025 obviously had not just that, but we had geopolitical, we had conflicts, cyber attacks. It's phenomenally hard to run an on-time operation of an airline of scale. So the winners that we've recognised in the 2025 On-Time Performance Awards have done a terrific job this year, a really good job.
It is an interesting point that you raised there, Jeremy, that perhaps some of these awards, it depends. I mean, some things are out of the airline's control, but nonetheless, tell us about some of the winners and kind of what you see in them. We have a repeat winner, I understand, for the first time in Aero Mexico, and also Latin America doing well in general, perhaps, with Santiago, the airport, winning in that category. Is it a good continent to travel?
It's a good continent to travel. It's interesting. We break down the top 10 airlines and airports within each region. And when you look globally at all of our top 10s, we look at the medium to see year on year, are the top 10 airlines and airports actually getting better or they're going backwards? And across the board in every region, we've seen an increase, which is terrific. Ironically, it's actually Europe and the Middle East and Africa where we've seen strong progress. They're up over 3% of their mediums. But Latin America's done well. That's up 0.5%. And obviously they're the home to Aero Mexico, who is the most on-time global airline in 2025. And as you said, they followed the performance from 2024. We've been producing these results for 17 years, and that's only the second time we've ever seen somebody follow their figures and also become a repeat winner in consecutive years. That they've done a terrific job.
Well, and you mentioned there sort of improvements in Europe and the Middle East. You've even introduced a new award that looks specifically at the most improved. The winner is Virgin Atlantic, but tell us also what prompted this. Are you kind of hoping to spotlight those airlines that are really trying to work on their performance?
We've seen when we look at the airlines that win these awards, and it's really important to point out, we don't decide which airline wins it. This is purely down to the data. We produce the data, and on the back of it, we can see exactly who's won it and who hasn't. And the percentages in these top 10 are fractions of percentages. So not many organisations walk away with an award with a huge amount. What we tend to see across every airline that's successful is really three things. We see that it starts at the top of the organisation. The CEO, the executive team, they're driving that culture by putting the customer first, and then they build their network around making sure that they're on time. We also see phenomenally strong partnerships, as you mentioned about the Aero Mexico, and also with the airport in Mexico also being the third most on time. We see those strong partnerships, and we see companies making investment, airlines and airports that invest in infrastructure, equipment, people, analytics to do it. And so we recognise those. We've introduced that new award, as you said. We wanted to see in that global category, who are the airlines that are really, they might not have won the award, but who are really pushing hard, who are making massive progress. And delighted to say that the winner this year in the inaugural report was Virgin Atlantic. Their on-time performance moved remarkably. They had a 74% on-time performance in 2024. That's gone up 9.44% to 83.45. To move that much when you run such a complex operation going into multiple continents, multiple routes is really an impressive performance. So they're the inaugural winner.
And Jeremy, speaking of that complexity, how difficult it is to do this, and as we were talking about at the top of this as well, what I find interesting, one of your awards that I also find interesting is this Platinum Award, because you mentioned there that this is all based on the data, and yet when you do your Platinum Award, you're looking at kind of everything, not just how on time an airline or an airport is, but all of the complexities of their operation and sort of how they're doing within that complexity. And that went to Qatar Airways and also to Istanbul's airport. What set them apart?
Yeah, we introduced, for the airlines, we introduced this award 5 years ago. I said we've been doing the programme for 17 years. And that's where it's very different running an operation with maybe 100,000 flights a year than running an operation with 1.8 million flights a year. The complexity of those to deliver that on-time performance is very, very different. And so we wanted to create an algorithm that reflected, okay, let's look at on-time performance, but let's also look at the complexity of the operation, how many routes it's flying to. Let's look to see how they handle delays and cancellations, because ultimately putting the customer first, the passenger first. And when we look at on-time arrivals, and when we look at, for the airport, when we look at on-time departures, the industry standard that we use for all the other reports is, it has the flight arrived or departed within 15 minutes of its scheduled time. So if I'm due to land at 12 o'clock, if I land at 10 past 12, I'm still classed as on time. When we look at the Platinum Awards, we do take that into account, but we also look at the number of passengers affected if they're even later than that, or if they're earlier and they arrive absolutely on time. So it's really putting the passenger at the heart of that complex operation. And as we've said, we've had the worthy winner. We've had 4 years of being the same airline, and this is the first time that it's come outside of North America with Qatar and Istanbul Airport as well, are the first time winners of it. So we're delighted for them both.
Jeremy Bowen, CEO of the aviation data analysts Cirium, thank you so much for joining us and unpacking some of those awards and results. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, it is time for the return of our winter weekly series where we tap Monocle's editors and leading contributors to delight us with their cold weather recommendations, from unique gift ideas and ways to look sharp in the cold to seasonal dishes and wines to celebrate with. For this week's edition, Anita Ryota sat down with Monocle's resident film expert, Lily Austin, to discuss her favorite off-the-beaten-path holiday films for you all to enjoy as you head into the winter. It might be a cold January. Lily's first recommendation takes us all the way back to the 1940s.
Well, we're in the post-Christmas period, right? We're in the kind of hinterland between 2026 and 2025. So you've probably already watched Die Hard, Home Alone, The Grinch. So I wanted to offer our listeners some alternative Christmas films that maybe you haven't yet watched, but you've still got some time. And these are all classic movies that I would strongly recommend. So this first one is The Red Shoes. It's based on a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, but it's also a ballet. In fact, listeners, if you're in London right now, you can go see the ballet of it that's currently being performed at Sadler's Wells. It's a Matthew Bourne production, which I hear is fantastic. But this came out in 1948, and it's directed by the legendary duo Michael Powell and Emmetic Pressburger. And it's the most beautiful film. It was shot in Technicolor, which people know this phrase, but what that really means is it was shot in black and white and then coloured afterwards. So it has this really rich, vibrant tone. And the kind of central ballet scene is completely mesmerizing. So I wanted to start off with a family-friendly movie, though I will say that it's very entertaining, it's very funny. It's definitely one for the family, but it does have a slight dark edge. That's the thing about Powell and Pressburger. They're known for having a slight darkness in all their films. They also did Black Narcissus, which is, that is a very dark one, but that's not quite so intense. It's a perfect film for Christmas. It's very magical. It's like going into another world. It's a little bit Alice in Wonderland, but there is this darkness, I do warn you.
We don't want anyone to blindly watch these with their children. Some of them are more suitable. Some of them, you'll see, we are bringing some new flavors into the Christmas movie sphere. The second film you brought to this list is a film I've seen, is a movie I adore. Tell us about this one.
This is by Todd Haynes. This is Carol. So this came out in 2015. And it's a historical drama. It's based on a novel called The Price of Salt that was written in 1952. And that's when this film is set. And it stars Rooney Mara, who plays a shop girl who encounters Carol, who's played by Cate Blanchett, completely beguiled by her. And then they kind of enter into this illicit relationship because think of the time period. And it's set at Christmas. It's very beautifully filmed. It's, 1950s New York, Rooney Mara in a Santa's hat. It's very evocative, very moving. And Todd Haynes is known for doing melodrama, and he definitely does that with this film. It's a magical and very kind of moving movie.
And another visually striking film also, I'll say, the sort of color scaling. It's really just its own. It's very unique. We have two more films to get through. They are two iconic films. Tell us about the first one.
So the first one, I would say certainly a Christmas film because it's set at Christmas. But this is Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. Came out in 1999. Listeners might remember it as being iconically a film where Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were married when the film was shot. And it is a film really about a couple's married life disintegrating. And famously, the couple did divorce a couple of years after, which personally I think is quite a long time after. I don't think we can blame it on this. But they probably were put under a lot of strain because this has actually famously had the longest shooting time of all time. They shot for 15 months, originally booked for 6 months. And if you think Tom Cruise in 1999, this was the height of his celebrity and like star power. And he was out of action working on other films for all of this time to do this movie with Kubrick. I would say it's Kubrick's most ambitious film. I'm not sure if it's its most successful, but there's something very suitable for a Christmas film about this because it is you go into another world. It's like Alice going through the looking glass again. The times where we're with Tom Cruise, it's at night. It's like he's still in New York, but he's gone into another world. You know, there's this famous scene where he enters a masked ball and then kind of everything unfolds from that. And despite the very long run time, it's like 2.5 hours, I believe, you're with him the whole way through and it's completely magical. And it's dark and it's sinister, but it's really, really engaging and engrossing.
And then our final film, I love that you brought us an homage to Rob Reiner. Tell us which film of his you picked.
Yeah, I had to, of course. The news of Rob Reiner passing in December was devastating to me because he's such a fantastic director. It's such a loss. So I really wanted to include one of his films. And there are a few that would work, I think, for a Christmas movie. The thing about Rob Reiner is I wanted to mention him straight after Stanley Kubrick because he's sort of like the mainstream Stanley Kubrick because just like Stanley Kubrick, he's made a brilliant film in every genre almost. So with Rob Reiner, he's made Stand By Me, which is a kind of a classic coming-of-age film, The Princess Bride, a classic children's fantasy movie. But my favourite, and the one that I think is most fitting for this time of year, is When Harry Met Sally, because we see all the pivotal moments happen on New Year's Eve, and then we follow the characters kind of through the year, through the seasons. And it is the most definitive rom-com. So after offering some slightly alternative movies, I wanted to finish with one that is definitely family-friendly. I think I watched it for the first time when I was 10 years old and completely fell in love with it. Because, you know, people always remember Billy Crystal as being hilarious, but it's also Meg Ryan who really shines in this movie. And the thing about it is that it's really a snapshot of a particular cultural, temporal moment. It's New York in the 90s, in the late 80s, very specific. But it's also a real snapshot in film time in Hollywood because this is a mid-budget movie, which has all the production value of a big-budget movie. So it's a really wonderful film to watch to really enjoy that kind of magic. And Rob Reiner at his best.
Monocle Radio's Lily Austin in conversation with Anita Riotta there for our winner series. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis and our studio manager was Lily Austin. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Cermak. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks for listening.